Okay, the recording has started, and welcome to a beautiful Monday here on Lookout Mountain and in Chattanooga. Um, I really, again, appreciate everybody getting through this semester. I know it's very, very strange, but with any luck at all, we'll be back to some sort of pseudo-normal next fall. Anyway, we will continue this week going through our unit on media history. We should finish up next week, so the test will be the week of March 22nd. So this is the single longest part of the course. Then we'll really get into law and ethics and a little bit more on advertising, public relations, and world issues and stuff like that. So that's the rest of the course. We will finish this unit in March, finish up the rest of it in April, and that's how a bill becomes a law, as they say on Schoolhouse Rock. Anyway, what we do now is what we do this week is, hold on, we'll do the screen share. Here we go. This week, we will start with the 20th century. We're up and we'll finish that up next week. A lot of stuff going on. What we're going to do this week is talk about ethics and then the beginning of broadcasting next time. And then next week, TV and the internet, and we are done. Today, we're going to talk about ethics. Now, to get you thinking about ethics, we have a little assignment due Friday at midnight. The assignment says, please have one example of good ethical behavior in the media and an example of bad or unethical behavior. 300 words minimum, you know how that is, no maximum. You can write as much as you want, at least 300 words should about do it. And please break it into paragraphs. Just one paragraph, even if it's 300 words. One long paragraph doesn't really convey the kind of information we need to have in a good essay. What I need as part of that, a link to the thing you're talking about, and there should be one good one and one bad one, so I can understand what's going on. And secondly, an explanation. I'll have codes of ethics today. You can use that or some other ethical source. Again, an unlimited amount of sources, but at least one outside to say, hey, why this is good, why this is bad. The whole point is you don't need to be pulling this stuff out of your butt. You need to back up your ideas anytime you make a point. You just can't say, because I say so. You need something outside to illustrate your point anytime you make an original point. In this course, in a science course, even in an art course, if you say, oh, that's pretty or that's ugly, why? You always need to have the why. Anyway, so let's talk a little about media ethics. Now, as we were talking in the 19th century, there was no such thing as media ethics. There was at the beginning of the Constitution, when we wrote the First Amendment, and I keep saying this in this class, free speech is not about ethics. It's not about bias or being unbiased. It's about being able to be biased. It's about being able to lie. The limit is you can't defraud somebody or truly hurt them with your lies. Now, in the end of the 19th century, when you had all this technology, the telegraph, the telephone, the high-speed press, all of that made the press very powerful. We saw how it started the Spanish-American War and made Teddy Roosevelt a star. We saw how we had a big sex scandal with Grover Cleveland, who still got elected. So people started realizing that media can be powerful. One of the first people who said, aha, with all this power, maybe we should do something about it. And of course, we have free speech, so the government can't limit it much. So it's really up to the practitioners in the media to limit themselves. And one of the first people who said, hey, what about this media ethics stuff, is a man who lived in Chattanooga.
All the news that's fit to print. The Adolph Ochs story. Adolph Ochs, born March 2nd, 1858, received little formal education, but he possessed talent and industry and had a personality to exploit them. At age 11, Adolph began working for the Knoxville Chronicle. He'd arrive at 5 a.m., fold the 50 papers for his route, walk 4 miles delivering them, go home for a brief breakfast, and by 7 a.m., be seated at school. In 1877, Adolph Ochs began working for the Chattanooga Dispatch. The paper failed, but Ochs stayed in Chattanooga. A year later, at 20, he bought the Chattanooga Daily Times.
Yep, it's still there. It's now the Times Free Press. But the Chattanooga Times, which right there originally on Commerce Street by downtown, is where the concept of media ethics truly began.
Borrowing the $250 down payment and trying to turn around a struggling paper with just $12.50 in working capital. He tirelessly helped the city grow and was a major factor in creating a local economic boom in the 1880s.
You can see that building still on Georgia Avenue.
The Panic of 1893 dealt Ochs a severe economic blow, and by 1896, he was on the verge of collapse, so he did what he did best. He bought another failing newspaper, the New York Times.
There you go. There's this little newspaper in New York City who was owned by the Jerome family. Jenny Jerome went to England and married a nobleman, and her son was named Winston Churchill.
He drew on his experience at the Chattanooga Daily Times, and with $70,000 in credit and a letter from Grover Cleveland, he took over the collapsing New York Times. He made a promise to give the news impartially, without fear or favor.
And that was a new idea. You saw how Hearst and Pulitzer just said whatever to make it look good. He wanted to do something different. Why? Not because he was public service oriented, although that was part of it. Part of it is everyone was complaining about the press, and he said, let's do something different to stand out from the crowd.
Then he lowered the price of the Times from 3 cents to 1 cent, in spite of others telling him to raise it to 5 cents. The Times turned around and became one of the nation's great newspapers. In 1897, Ochs coined the slogan, all the news that's fit to print.
That's right, all the news that's fit. Something that's good, something's real. Now, the problem is, and we're still arguing about that 130 years later, what's fit to print and what isn't? There's no particular answer to that question still.
Print, which still appears on the front page of the New York Times today. On New Year's Eve, 1906, at midnight, Mr. Ochs dropped an illuminated ball from the top of Times Tower in Times Square, starting an event that today is watched by millions. Adolph Ochs left Chattanooga after he bought the New York Times, yet he continued to have an active interest in the community and its development.
That's right. You see the Ochs Highway, where I go up every day to go back and forth to home. The Ochs Museum, there on Point Park. And the Ochs family is still around in Chattanooga even today.
In 1935, he endowed a chair in city government and politics at what was then the University of Chattanooga.
Yep, and you can see that spot right there on Macaulay Avenue.
Mr. Ox was instrumental in preserving the historic Civil War Chickamauga battlefield, purchasing and donating the majority of the land forming the Chattanooga Lookout Mountain Park. Today, the Ox Center for Metropolitan Studies, located in Chattanooga, offers research and data analysis services for local nonprofit organizations and local government. Adolph Ox, a part of Tennessee's unique history of law and liberty.
And from Chattanooga was really where the concept of media ethics really started gaining ground. Shortly thereafter, 1909, journalists who start listening to people like Ox started to get together and say, aha, we're not just turning out stuff. Let's try to be professional and define what ethics is. Ox said, oh, what's fit to print? But we don't know what's fit to print. Well, the Society of Professional Journalists, of which I am a member of the local board of directors, decided to decide what professional journalism is. First journalism school to learn what good journalism is, University of Missouri, 1912. 1922, the American Society of Newspaper Editors got together and wrote down what they believe ethics is. And here it is, the original code of ethics. Journalism needs to be responsible. Write a newspaper is restricted to the public welfare. Freedom of the press. Independence. Those sorts of things. Impartiality. It should be, the rest of that document should be there. Impartial, okay, page 2. Here is page 2. Continue for free, come on. Anyway, those are the important things. Today, well, that's the original, you can get the idea. The original, that was the original. Here's the important stuff. Today's SPJ Code of Ethics. Yours truly was on the committee to help write this. Journalists should be ethical, obviously. Seek truth. Take responsibility for accuracy. Remember, speed nor format excuses inaccuracy. Context is take care not to misrepresent or oversimplify things. Now, when you provide context, understanding of the news, the challenge is whether or not that context is biased. And that's a challenge. Consider sources' motives. Who's trying to get into the press and why? Hold truth to power. We talked about the John Peter Zenger. Label advocacy and commentary. If it's an opinion, let them know it's an opinion. And too many, this is one hint, 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 might be good for this assignment. I notice a lot of media outlets don't let you know what is fact and what's opinion. You should minimize harm. Ethical should balance the needs for information against harm, show compassion for those who might be, show compassion, but that doesn't mean not to do it. Consider the implications of what you do. Act independently. Conflict of interest, refuse gifts and favors, that's a hard one. Distinguish news from advertising, that's another hard one. Should be ethical and transparent. respond to questions. Again, a lot of people have trouble with these. Why do they have trouble? Because ethics are voluntary. There is no ethical police. I'll even write that down. Strengths. Good. Guidelines and foundations. Weakness. No enforcement power. There is no ethics police. There is no ethics corps. Ethics are things you should do. Laws are things you can and cannot do. Ethics are things you can do. You can be unethical all you want. The question is whether or not you should. Ethics today. 5 core principles: truth and accuracy, independence, fairness, humanity, and accountability. There
are about 400 codes of conduct around the world, covering all aspects of journalism. Some of them are very short, some of them are very long. But actually all of them are really focused on 5 key values for journalism. And the first of them is accuracy. I won't say truth because truth is a very long word. It actually gets us into a discussion about really what is true and what is not true. But accuracy is very important. So therefore, the first principle is no deceptive handling of the facts. We work in facts, so fact-based information. Secondly, there's the principle of independence. The work that you do is your own work, but it's not on behalf of anyone else. You're not there to be a spokesman for the government. You're not there to be a representative of a particular business group or a special interest group. You have transparency in what you do so that when you are speaking and dealing with your audience and producing material, you're acting independently as an independent professional. Thirdly, there is the principle of impartiality. That is to say, you recognize that there's more than one side of a story. And very often there's more than 2 sides of a story. And as a journalist, you're responsible for looking and thinking about what are the other sides of this story. Here is one story that's being told, but what are the other opinions that I need to bring in to make the story whole? And then fourthly, there's the question of humanity. As a journalist, you're expected to show humanity. And what I mean by that is you're expected to be aware of the consequences of what you publish and what you broadcast. So you have to be aware that sometimes the words you use, the pictures you show can do damage. They can be harmful to people. It's not the job of a journalist to do undue harm. It's our job to protect people. And it's very important that when we are in reporting, we don't indulge in hate speech. We don't show obscene images. We don't show unnecessarily explicit images of violence and so on, because we are part of a humanitarian process, and that's what journalism should be. So humanity is a very important part of it. And fifthly is the issue of accountability. It's the one that's probably most difficult for journalists, and that's, we're not a humble group. We find it difficult to say sorry and to admit our mistakes, even though we can be lacerating in our criticism of others. But we have to do that. We have to engage with the audience and we have to correct our mistakes. And we have to be prepared to provide remedies when we get it wrong and do damage. So these principles are pretty straightforward. Accuracy, independence, impartiality, humanity, and accountability. Those are the things that what make journalism different and distinct.
And that ain't easy, because what you think is humane and truthful, someone else might not. Okay. So that is where we are now, from the beginning to where we are now in ethics. And then technology continues in the 20th century to develop. You have Associated Press, 1906, which takes news from all over the world as a clearinghouse, and you pay a fee to Associated Press and you get news everywhere. So with Associated Press, the local paper in Chattanooga can get news from London and Paris and Moscow. So it connects us all. Then you get the small camera. So you don't have this big box camera that they used to have. Now you have a small one that you could take everywhere. And what did you get with the little camera? We talk about ethics. What? Sometimes you get some things that aren't all that ethical. There we go. Weather always makes good pictures. You always see a lot of weather in the media, in the news, because it makes a good picture. And people have some fun, even before the internet filter and before Photoshop. So much for ethics. But this is golden age of newspapers. It's also a business, and this is what sells. Anyway, that's my point. That's my point. You can see more of one of the first big paparazzi types, but we get that. Why? Because ethics is voluntary. Here's the difference between law and ethics. Law are things you can and cannot do. You have civil law, that's like a lawsuit. If someone falls in a construction site, is it the fault of the person for being clumsy, or is it the product of the construction company for leaving an open hole? Criminal law is, robbery, murder, all of that stuff. It's just wrong. It's a crime against society, but not a question of responsibility. Common law, mostly civil, is case law that and precedent, which means, if somebody falls and gets hurt on a construction site, what happened before in a case like that? That helps you determine this sort of case. In civil law, in criminal law, that's just written down. And that's statutory law. Written down. Clear right and wrong. Rules and regulations are no jail time, lead to fines and loss of license. This is what happens with a broadcast situation. If you drop too many F-bombs, you could get a fine and lose your license, but you're not going to go to jail. That kind of law is a lot less scary than criminal or civil, but it's still a part of law. Difference between law and ethics, I'll tell you. Laws written down, decided by cops and courts. Ethics, voluntary, enforced by employers. The audience If the audience does not like what you have on the air, that has a lot of pressure. But ultimately, a personal decision. Areas of law in the media: libel, which is a lawsuit for damage if you're to a reputation. If there is an inaccuracy and you are hurt by it, if you are falsely accused of a crime or something bad, the media can give you damage, but you have to sue. You have to get a lawyer, and that could be expensive. So a lot of media outlets get away with libel. Libel, fraud, obscenity. Those are things, and I'll say has to be really bad to be a legal problem. Coverage of courts. What am I thinking? National security. Privacy. There is privacy law. So those are some of the big ones. Oh, copyright. We talked about that in this class. We will again. Huge these days, copyright, intellectual property. Ethical issues include bias. There is no law that says you have to be unbiased. Same thing with truth. There's no law that says anything in the media has to be true. You just cannot be fraudulent or libelous with your lies. Diversity. We talk a lot about diversity. It's voluntary. There is no law that says you have to be diverse. Violence. There is no law that says you have to be or cannot be violent, including curse words, matters of taste. This is like curse words. Now, the FCC, which gives you a license, says you could get a fine for too many F-bombs, but you're not going to go to jail or anything like that. Curse words, some nudity. We will talk about obscenity law later in the course. But there's no law for, there's a line between taste and porn, and we'll talk about where that line is drawn. Hate speech. These days, what's hateful and what's not. A lot of people do not like hate speech. It is protected by the First Amendment. There is no right not to be offensive. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be consequences if you say something hateful, if you say something demeaning, racist, offensive. You can get fired, but you can't go to jail. Hate speech is legal. You may not like it, but it's real. Rights and privileges. A right is something that we are born with and the government will not take away, like free speech, like right to practice your religion. That is something the government protects because it comes from God. Privileges are something that the government can take away. A driver's license is a privilege. Your education is a privilege. So if you get a bad grade, your rights have not been violated, we can, you can be expelled from school. But you do have a right for equal protection. And so if you get a bad grade because I like some people and not others, then I can get in trouble. Then your rights are being denied if you're not being treated equally. But there's no right to a grade, no right to an education. Other privileges, like I say, education and in speech, there is no right not to be offended. How do you decide what's a right and what's a privilege? Court cases. That's where we decide that, again, prayer in the schools, 1947, that the state has to limit prayer in the schools because it's against the First Amendment. So that's where rights and privileges. Okay, here are our rights in question. Journalists have no more rights than anybody. We're just in the business of free speech. But anybody is a private citizen, including freedom of information. Crime scenes. Journalists cannot interfere in a crime scene, but neither can a private citizen. Trials. That's another one where journalists can mess up a trial. National security. You have information that may affect national security. Those are areas where free speech can be limited. Others, incite. This is what problem January 6th, where free speech turns into action. In other words, I could say, boy, I'm mad and I'd like to punch your nose. I can say that, but then I go out and punch somebody in the nose, then that's an assault. Now, if I say, I'd like to see that person punched in the nose, that's legal. If I say, Bob, you go out because I'm mad at Fred, you punch Fred in the nose for me, that's where speech becomes action. And that's illegal. So these are kind of fuzzy areas. So for this week, what I'd like you to do is look at this. Look at what we talked about. Look at the codes of ethics that I supplied, and there are others out there, like one of the videos said. There's a public relations code. There is there are game codes of what's right or wrong. Look at some outside information of what's right and wrong. And then apply that to something that you see. And remember, ethics is voluntary. So there's plenty of good, there's plenty of bad. Give me one of each this week, and we'll talk more Wednesday. Wednesday, we'll talk about broadcast history and the beginning of real mass media. Anyway, that's what I talked about today. I appreciate it. And Carson and Julia, who are always here, I cannot thank you enough. Can't thank Juniper enough. We appreciate your presence, and I will post this in about 10 minutes. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.